November 24, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve, Portland International Airport, Oregon, United States. A man in his mid-40s walked calmly toward the Northwest Orient Airlines counter, dressed in a dark business suit, black overcoat, and sunglasses, and purchased a one-way ticket for $18.52 to Seattle, Washington. He gave his name as Dan Cooper, though a later reporting error by the press would immortalize him in history as D.B. Cooper, and what followed over the next few hours would become the only unsolved case of air piracy in the history of American commercial aviation, a case that remains open in FBI archives even decades later. Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305, a Boeing 727 with 36 passengers and a crew of 6, and took seat 18C near the rear of the aircraft, a seat chosen deliberately, investigators would later believe, for its proximity to the aircraft's most unusual design feature. As the plane taxied for departure, he calmly ordered a bourbon and soda from flight attendant Florence Schaffner, lit a cigarette, and shortly after, passed her a folded note. Schaffner, assuming it was simply a phone number from a passenger flirting with her, slipped it into her pocket without reading it. Cooper leaned toward her and quietly said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note stated that he was carrying a bomb in his briefcase and demanded $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by upon landing in Seattle. When Schaffner asked to see the bomb, Cooper briefly opened his briefcase, revealing a tangle of wires, a battery, and red cylindrical sticks that appeared to be dynamite, enough to convince her and the rest of the crew that the threat was credible. Schaffner alerted the cockpit, and the pilot, Captain William Scott, immediately notified Seattle Air Traffic Control, setting off a chain of events that would trigger one of the largest manhunts in FBI history. As the aircraft circled Puget Sound for nearly 2 hours to allow authorities time to gather the ransom and parachutes, passengers remained unaware of the unfolding crisis, told only that the flight was experiencing a minor mechanical delay. Northwest Orient Airlines, in coordination with the FBI, assembled $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills, whose serial numbers were secretly photographed and recorded on microfilm before being handed over. Meanwhile, authorities scrambled to locate 4 parachutes on short notice, eventually sourcing them from a local skydiving school. When the plane landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport just after 5:30 p.m., Cooper allowed all 36 passengers and 2 flight attendants to disembark once his demands were met, keeping only the cockpit crew and flight attendant Tina Mucklow aboard, a calculated move that reduced witnesses while still ensuring he had enough personnel to fly the aircraft. With the ransom money and parachutes delivered by an airline employee who approached the aircraft alone under Cooper's careful watch, Cooper instructed the pilots to take off again, this time toward Mexico City, but at a specific low altitude of 10,000 feet, with the landing gear down, wing flaps set at 15 degrees, and the cabin unpressurized. Air Force fighter jets were scrambled to trail the airliner at a distance, though pilots later reported they lost visual contact with Cooper's exact movements inside the cabin due to darkness and the storm developing below. Somewhere over the dense, rain-soaked forests of southwestern Washington, near the Oregon border, Cooper ordered Tina Mucklow to the cockpit and asked her to close the curtain separating the cabin from the cockpit, and shortly after, lowered the aircraft's rear staircase, a distinctive feature of the Boeing 727 that allowed passengers to exit directly onto the tarmac without external stairs, and which Cooper alone among hijackers of that era seemed to fully understand how to operate mid-flight. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the flight crew felt a sudden pressure bump, later determined by investigators to be the exact moment Cooper leapt from the aircraft into the freezing, storm-lashed darkness below, wearing only a business suit, thin raincoat, and loafers, carrying with him a parachute and a bag containing the ransom money, never to be seen again. The Federal Bureau of Investigation launched an operation codenamed Norjack, short for Northwest Hijacking, led for years by Special Agent Ralph Himmelsbach, who would later describe Cooper not as a folk hero, as popular culture often did, but as a common criminal who had gambled with the lives of 42 people aboard that aircraft. Search teams combed thousands of acres of dense forest in Clark and Cowlitz counties, using helicopters, ground units, tracking dogs, and later even military personnel. But no trace of Cooper, his parachute, or the money was found in the immediate aftermath. Chill. Weather data reconstructed after the fact showed the temperature at 10,000 feet. That night was likely well below freezing. With wind the following years, the FBI investigated more than 800 suspects, cross-referencing physical descriptions, military parachute training records, and financial backgrounds, focusing particularly on individuals with piloting or skydiving experience, given the technical precision of Cooper's demands and his familiarity with the Boeing 727's rear air stair mechanism, a detail known primarily to aviation insiders and military personnel at the time. Names such as Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Army helicopter pilot, and Green Beret, who conducted a nearly identical hijacking just months later in April 1972, using almost the same method. Kenneth Christensen, a former Northwest Orient purser whose family later claimed suspicious behavior and unexplained wealth after 1971, and Dwayne Weber, whose deathbed confession to his wife in 1995 reignited public interest decades later, all surfaced as persons of interest, yet none could be definitively linked to the crime through physical or forensic evidence, and the FBI publicly cleared or deprioritized each of them at various points over the years. Richard McCoy in particular fascinated investigators, since his hijacking was so procedurally similar that many believed Cooper had either inspired him, or the two might even be connected, though McCoy had a solid alibi placing him elsewhere on Thanksgiving 1971, and he was killed in a shootout with FBI agents in 1974 following his eventual capture for the separate hijacking, closing that avenue permanently. The case remained largely cold and faded from mainstream headlines until February 1980, when an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram, digging in the sandy banks of the Columbia River at a location called Tana Bar, while on a family picnic north of Vancouver, Washington, unearthed 3 decaying rubber-banded bundles of cash that FBI forensic analysis confirmed were part of the original ransom money, their serial numbers matching those recorded nearly a decade earlier down to the exact bill sequence. This discovery reignited the investigation and sparked entirely new theories about where Cooper may have landed or where his remains might have washed downstream over the years. Yet, it also deepened the mystery rather than resolving it, since the location suggested the money had traveled through natural river currents rather than being buried deliberately by a survivor, raising serious new questions about whether Cooper had survived the jump at all, or whether the money alone had somehow separated from him during his descent or shortly after landing in or near the river. Forensic geologists and hydrologists were later brought in decades afterward to model how the cash bundles could have traveled to that exact spot on the riverbank, producing competing theories that placed Cooper's actual landing zone anywhere from several miles north to well outside the FBI's original search perimeter, effectively undermining years of prior ground search efforts. Throughout the decades that followed, amateur investigators, retired FBI agents, and true crime researchers continued pursuing leads independently, submitting DNA samples, partial fingerprints lifted from the hijacked aircraft's tray table and armrest, and a black clip-on tie Cooper had left behind on his seat for repeated forensic testing using increasingly advanced technology unavailable during the original 1971 investigation. In 2011, a Seattle FBI review of the tie under electron microscopy revealed microscopic traces of rare earth elements, including titanium and other metals, an open collaborative mystery involving the public at large. Despite thousands of tips, more than 800 formal suspects investigated over the decades, the Federal Bureau of Investigation officially announced in July 2016 that it was suspending active investigation into the case, citing the need to redirect resources and personnel toward more prioritized and solvable investigative matters, though the FBI field office in Seattle retained all physical evidence. The announcement was met with a mixture of disappointment and renewed public fascination, as newspapers and true crime podcasts revisited the case with fresh interest, cementing Cooper's status not merely as a criminal, but as a kind of American folk legend, someone who briefly outsmarted the entire federal government and vanished cleanly into the wilderness, an image at odds with the FBI's own characterization of him as a reckless criminal who endangered dozens of innocent lives. To this day, no confirmed trace of Dan Cooper's identity, fate, or the remaining $194,000 of ransom money has ever been found, leaving behind a case that continues to fascinate historians, aviation experts, forensic researchers, and true crime enthusiasts alike, a rare instance in American criminal history where a man vanished into the storm clouds of the Pacific Northwest and simply became a ghost, his true name and ultimate destiny forever swallowed by the dense, unforgiving forests below. His story living on not in a courtroom verdict or a grave, but in the enduring, unanswered question of what really happened after 8:13 p.m. on that stormy Thanksgiving Eve in 1971.
This program is closed. Official closing title card.